I should have known something was wrong when Marcus started asking about my retirement accounts. But let me back up. 3 months before my Sarah's wedding, I was sitting in my little kitchen, paying bills and wondering how I'd scrape together enough for a decent mother-of-the-bride dress, when someone knocked on my door. Not the friendly neighbor knock or the delivery guy's quick rap. This was official business. The man in the expensive suit introduced himself as Charles Whitmore from Whitmore and Associates. He had a briefcase, and that look lawyers get when they're about to change your life. "Mrs. Eleanor Hayes? I'm here about your brother Harold's estate." Harold. My brother, who hadn't spoken to me in 15 years over some silly family argument I couldn't even remember anymore. Harold, who'd made his fortune in real estate while I served meatloaf to middle schoolers. "I'm sorry to inform you that Harold passed away last month," Mr. Whitmore said, settling into my worn kitchen chair. "But I have good news. You're his sole beneficiary." The number he told me made my coffee cup slip right out of my hands. $7 million. $7 million. I sat there staring at this stranger in my kitchen, wondering if this was some elaborate prank. Me, Eleanor Hayes, who'd been clipping coupons for 40 years and buying generic cereal, was suddenly rich enough to buy the whole grocery store. "There are some papers to sign," Mr. Whitmore continued, "but the money should be available within the week. Congratulations, Mrs. Hayes." After he left, I sat in my empty house and cried. Not from joy exactly, but from the overwhelming weight of it all. Sarah's wedding was 3 months away, and she'd been so stressed about money. They were having the reception in the church basement, because that's all they could afford. She kept apologizing to me about it, as if I expected something grander. Now I could give her the wedding of her dreams. I could pay off her student loans, buy her a house, set her up for life. The relief was so strong it made me dizzy. That's when I met Marcus. Sarah brought him over for Sunday dinner the weekend after the lawyer's visit. He was handsome in that polished way some men are, with perfect teeth and expensive shoes. The kind of man who shook your hand just a little too firmly and called you ma'am, while his eyes catalogued everything in your house. "Sarah tells me you worked in food service," he said over my pot roast. "That must have been challenging financially." I almost choked on my carrots. "We managed just fine." Of course. It's just that Sarah mentioned you might be able to help with some wedding expenses, and I wanted to make sure we weren't putting you in a difficult position." Sarah blushed. "Marcus, I told you Mom said she'd help however she could. And I think that's wonderful," Marcus said, reaching over to squeeze Sarah's hand. "Families should support each other, especially when there are resources available." Resources available. Like he knew something I hadn't told anyone. Over the next few weeks, Marcus started showing up more often, always with questions about my financial planning and whether I had any investment advice. He'd mention his own family's wealth casually, dropping names of expensive restaurants and vacation spots, then asking about my own travel experiences. "You know, Eleanor," he said one evening, "Sarah's lucky to have a mother who's so financially secure. Not everyone can afford to help with wedding costs these days." I never said I was financially secure. "Oh, but it's obvious. The way you carry yourself, your confidence about money matters. Plus, Sarah mentioned you were meeting with lawyers recently. Estate planning, I assume?" My blood went cold. I'd told Sarah I was handling some paperwork for Harold's death, nothing more. But somehow Marcus had turned that into evidence of wealth. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about Marcus felt wrong, like a tooth that looked perfect but ached when you bit down on it. 2 weeks later, I found out why. I was in Sarah's apartment, helping her address wedding invitations, when Marcus stepped onto the balcony to take a phone call. The sliding door didn't close all the way. "Don't worry about it," I heard him say. "Her mom's loaded. Old lady's been playing poor, but she's sitting on a fortune. Once Sarah and I are married, she'll inherit everything, and we'll be set for life." The pen slipped from my fingers, leaving a blue streak across the ivory invitation. "Trust me," Marcus continued. "I've done my research. The old woman's got money, probably from some inheritance or insurance payout. She's just one of those people who likes to cry poor while sitting on a pile of cash." Sarah was humming softly beside me, completely oblivious to the conversation happening 10 feet away. She looked so happy, so in love, so trusting. "The wedding's in 6 weeks," Marcus said. "After that, it's just a matter of time before Sarah starts asking Mommy for help with our house, our future kids, our whole life. And Mommy won't be able to say no." I wanted to march out there and shake him until his perfect teeth rattled. I wanted to tell Sarah everything, to protect her from this monster who saw dollar signs when he looked at her. But I also wanted proof. Marcus came back inside, all smiles and apologies. Sorry about that work call. No problem, I managed. The next day, Marcus started his campaign in earnest. He began pressuring Sarah to ask me for a $50,000 wedding loan. It's normal for parents to invest in their children's future, he told her over dinner at my house. My parents gave us a generous wedding gift, and I'm sure your mother wants to do the same. Sarah squirmed in her chair. Marcus, we talked about this. Mom's on a fixed income. Are you though, Eleanor? Marcus asked, turning those calculating eyes on me. Because Sarah mentioned you've been meeting with financial advisors lately. Sounds like you're doing some planning. Just basic retirement stuff. I lied. Well, maybe your retirement is more secure than you've let on. Maybe you could afford to help your only daughter start her marriage without debt. I watched Sarah's face crumble with embarrassment. She was mortified that her fiancé was essentially asking me for money, but she was also torn because she wanted the wedding to be special. Mom, you don't have to, she started. Actually, Marcus interrupted, I think she wants to. Don't you, Eleanor? You want Sarah to have the wedding she deserves. Of course I did. With $7 million sitting in my bank account, I could give Sarah a wedding that would make the royal family jealous. I could pay for everything and still have enough left over to set up trust funds for her future children. But something in Marcus's smile stopped me cold. We'll manage with what we have, I said firmly. Marcus's smile tightened. Of course. I just thought, with family being so important. That night, Sarah called me crying. Mom, I'm so sorry about Marcus. He's just stressed about money, and he knows his family has more than we do. He doesn't mean to be pushy. Honey, if money is this important to him now, what's going to happen after you're married? It's not about the money, Sarah said quickly. He loves me. He just wants us to start our life together without struggling the way you and Dad did. Her words cut deep because they were true. Sarah's father and I had struggled. We'd fought about money, worried about bills, made do with less so she could have what she needed. I never wanted that for her. But I also never wanted her to marry someone who saw her as a meal ticket. The wedding day arrived like a storm I couldn't stop. Sarah looked beautiful in her grandmother's altered dress, radiant despite the church basement reception and grocery store flowers. Marcus stood at the altar in his expensive suit, smiling like a man who'd just won the lottery. Which in his mind he had. I gave my mother of the bride speech, talking about love and partnership and building a life together. I watched Marcus nod along, probably calculating how long he'd have to wait before Sarah started asking me for money. The whole time, $7 million sat in my bank account like a secret I couldn't tell. 6 months later, my phone rang at 2 a.m. Mom! Sarah's voice was thick with tears. Can you come over? I need you. I found her sitting on her couch in her pajamas, surrounded by papers and photos. Her laptop was open to Facebook, showing pictures of Marcus with another woman. The photos were dated from their honeymoon. I hired a private investigator, she said without looking up. I know it sounds crazy, but something felt wrong. Marcus kept asking about your finances, about inheritance, about money you might have saved. He seemed so sure you were hiding something. My heart stopped. Sarah, the investigator found out Marcus has done this before. Twice. He targets women whose families he thinks have money, marries them, then divorces them and takes half of everything. She finally looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. He was never planning to stay married to me, Mom. He was just waiting to figure out how much you're worth. I sat down beside her and pulled her into my arms, this broken woman who was still my little girl. There's more, she whispered. I found emails on his computer. He was planning to ask you to co-sign on a house for us, then use that to claim you'd made yourself financially responsible for our debts. He was going to bleed you dry, then leave me with nothing. I held her while she cried, grateful beyond words that Marcus's greed had been his downfall. If he'd truly loved Sarah, if he'd been content with what we appeared to have, he might have gotten away with it. I'm filing for divorce, Sarah said. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have listened when you seemed worried about him. You have nothing to apologize for, I told her. You loved him. That's not a mistake. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Marcus got nothing because there was nothing to get. Sarah kept her job, her little apartment, and her dignity. She never found out about the $7 million, and thank God for that. Because if she had known, if Marcus had discovered the truth, my daughter would have been trapped in a marriage with a man who saw her as a path to wealth instead of the amazing woman she is. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is keep a secret. Sometimes protecting someone means letting them think you have less than you do, not more. Sarah is dating again now, a nice man who teaches at the same school where she works. He brings her coffee in the morning and doesn't ask about my retirement accounts. And the $7 million? It's still sitting there, waiting for the right time. Maybe when Sarah has children and needs help with college funds. Maybe when she's older and wants to retire early. Maybe never. Because some gifts are more valuable when they're given freely, not taken by force. And my daughter's happiness? That's worth more than all the money in the world. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel too. Get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. I thought I'd dodged the worst of it after Sarah's divorce from Marcus. For 3 blissful months, life returned to something resembling normal. Sarah was healing, slowly but surely, and I was content to let my secret money sit untouched while I went back to my quiet retirement routine. Then Melissa Crawford called. Melissa was Sarah's wedding planner from the Marcus disaster, a chatty woman who treated other people's business like her personal entertainment network. I should have known she'd be trouble the moment she started gossiping about other clients during our first meeting. "Eleanor, honey," she chirped into my phone that Tuesday morning. "I just had to call you. I was downtown yesterday picking up flowers for the Patterson wedding, and I could have sworn I saw you coming out of Whitmore and Associates. That's such a fancy law firm. Are you doing some estate planning?" My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "I'm sorry, what?" "Oh, don't be embarrassed. It's so smart to get your affairs in order. My grandmother waited too long, and what a mess that was for the family. But Whitmore and Associates. That's where all the wealthy families go. The Hartfords, the Bishops, they only handle big estates, if you know what I mean." I knew exactly what she meant, and I knew exactly what she was going to do with this information. "I think you're mistaken," I said carefully. "I wasn't anywhere near downtown yesterday." "Oh, but I'm sure it was you. Same gray coat, same little blue car. Plus, you were carrying one of those expensive leather portfolios. Good for you, Eleanor. After everything with Sarah's divorce, it's nice to know you're financially secure." She hung up before I could correct her, but the damage was already done. By that afternoon, my phone started ringing. The first call came from my cousin Robert, Harold's nephew from his first marriage. I hadn't heard from Robert in at least 5 years, not since Harold's last Christmas party before our big falling out. "Eleanor, how are you holding up after Harold's passing? Such a shock, wasn't it?" "Hello, Robert. Yes, it was very sudden. Listen, I was wondering if you'd heard anything from Harold's lawyers yet. About the estate, I mean. I know you two had your differences, but Harold always spoke fondly of you. Wondered if he might have left you a little something." My pulse quickened. "Why would you think that?" "Oh, just hoping, you know. Harold was always so generous. I was hoping maybe he remembered the whole family in his will. Times have been tough since Patricia lost her job, and we could really use some help with the kids' college funds." "Patricia, Robert's wife. Another name to keep track of." I gave him some vague answer about not hearing anything yet, and hung up, but the calls kept coming. First my second cousin Janet from Portland, then Harold's old business partner's widow, Margaret, then people I barely remembered from family reunions decades ago. Each caller had the same casual tone, the same roundabout way of asking if Harold had left me anything. Each had a sob story ready. Medical bills, job losses, children's education costs. Each sounded desperate beneath their forced cheerfulness. But it was Linda who scared me. Linda Brennan, Harold's ex-wife, showed up at my door on a Thursday evening without warning. I opened it to find a woman I barely recognized, though we'd been sisters-in-law for nearly 15 years before Harold's divorce. Linda had been beautiful once, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. Harold had fallen for her hard and fast, marrying her within 6 months of their first date. But the woman standing on my porch looked like disappointment had carved itself into her bones. Her blonde hair was brittle and overprocessed, her designer clothes hung loose like she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, and her smile had the sharp edge of broken glass. "Hello, Eleanor. Aren't you going to invite me in?" I wanted to say no, but Linda pushed past me before I could answer. She settled herself on my couch like she owned it, crossing her legs and looking around my modest living room with barely concealed disdain. "Cute little place you have here. Very thrifty. What do you want, Linda? Can't an ex-sister-in-law drop by for a visit? We used to be close, remember? Before Harold turned into such a bastard." I remembered. I remembered how Linda had called me crying when Harold started working late nights. I remembered helping her plan surprise dinners to win back his attention. I remembered holding her while she sobbed when she found out about his secretary, Veronica. I also remembered how bitter she'd become during the divorce, how she'd tried to turn the whole family against Harold, including me. I heard some interesting news, Linda continued, examining her manicured nails. Word is you've been seen at some very expensive law offices lately. My heart sank. Where did you hear that? Oh, people talk. You know how it is in a small town. So tell me, Eleanor, what did my dear ex-husband leave you? I don't know what you're talking about. Linda's laugh was sharp as broken crystal. Please. Harold always had a soft spot for you. Even during our marriage, he'd talk about his sweet little sister Eleanor. How proud he was that you'd made something of yourself despite not having any advantages. It used to make me sick, actually. Linda, I know he left you something substantial, she interrupted, leaning forward with predatory intensity. Harold was sentimental about family, even after all these years of not speaking to you. And I know he had money to spare. So here's what's going to happen. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, setting it on my coffee table like evidence in a trial. Harold promised me half of everything when we got married. Community property, you understand. But when we divorced, his clever lawyers found ways to hide most of his assets. I got the house and a settlement, but I know there was more. Much more. I stared at the folder, afraid to ask what was inside. Harold died with unfinished business, Eleanor. He owed me, and now that debt transfers to whoever inherited his estate. I'm prepared to contest his will and drag this whole family through a very public, very ugly legal battle. Unless, of course, we can come to an understanding. What kind of understanding? 50%. Half of whatever Harold left you. It's only fair, considering I was married to him for 15 years and helped him build his fortune. My mouth went dry. Half of $7 million would be $3.5 million. More money than Linda could spend in a lifetime, but also more than I was willing to give up to someone who was essentially blackmailing me. And if I refuse? Linda's smile turned vicious. Then I'll make sure everyone knows about Harold's little inheritance. Your neighbors, your church friends, that sweet daughter of yours who just went through such a nasty divorce. I wonder how Sarah would feel knowing her mother has been hiding millions while watching her struggle financially. The threat hit me like a physical blow. Sarah was just starting to rebuild her life after Marcus. The last thing she needed was to discover her mother had been lying to her about money while she'd been scraping by on a teacher's salary. I need time to think about this, I managed. Of course you do. But don't take too long. I'm not a patient woman, and I have nothing left to lose. After Linda left, I sat in my kitchen with shaking hands, trying to figure out how my carefully guarded secret had become common knowledge. But the calls and visits kept coming, each family member more desperate and demanding than the last. My cousin Janet drove down from Portland with her teenage son, claiming Harold had promised to pay for the boy's college education. My nephew David, Harold's sister's son, called every night for a week, hinting that Harold had mentioned leaving him the vintage car collection. Even old Mrs. Garrett from Harold's neighborhood showed up, insisting Harold had promised to remember her in his will for taking care of his yard. But Linda was orchestrating all of it. I could see her hand in every conversation, every casual mention of Harold's estate, every pointed question about my finances. She was turning my own family into weapons against me. The breaking point came when Sarah called me, confused and hurt. Mom, I ran into Aunt Linda at the grocery store today. She said some strange things about Uncle Harold's will and about you keeping secrets. She said the family was concerned about your mental state, that maybe grief was making you confused about money matters. What exactly did she say? She said Harold left you a significant inheritance, and that you've been hiding it from everyone. She said she was worried about you making good financial decisions at your age, and that maybe I should help you manage whatever Harold left you. I closed my eyes, feeling the trap Linda had been setting snap shut around me. She was using Sarah's love and concern for me as leverage, making my daughter question my honesty and competence. She also said some things about Harold's marriage to her, about promises he made that weren't kept. Mom, is there something you're not telling me? The pain in Sarah's voice was worse than any threat Linda could have made. My daughter was starting to doubt me, starting to wonder if her own mother was lying to her. After everything she'd been through with Marcus, the last thing she needed was to question whether the people she trusted most were being honest with her. Honey, there are some legal matters I'm handling related to Harold's death, but nothing you need to worry about. But Linda said. Linda is Harold's ex-wife. She's bitter and angry, and she's trying to cause trouble for the family. Don't let her drag you into this. But I could hear the uncertainty in Sarah's voice, the seeds of doubt Linda had planted taking root. Over the next few days, Linda's campaign intensified. She started calling Sarah directly, sharing carefully crafted stories about Harold's wealth and my supposed deception. She told Sarah that Harold had owned multiple properties, investment accounts, and business interests that I was now hiding from the family. Linda painted herself as a concerned ex-family member who just wanted to make sure I wasn't being taken advantage of by unscrupulous lawyers or financial advisors. She suggested that Sarah should insist on seeing Harold's will and any related documents, just to protect me from making mistakes. The worst part was that some of it sounded reasonable. Linda was clever, mixing just enough truth with her lies to make her stories believable. Yes, Harold had been wealthy. Yes, I was handling estate matters. Yes, I was being secretive about the details. What Linda didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been smart enough to take Mr. Whitmore's advice about protecting the inheritance. The $7 million wasn't sitting in my regular checking account where any investigator could find it. It was in a separate account under my maiden name, Eleanor Murphy, handled by a different bank in a different city. Legally, everything was above board. Mr. Whitmore had set up the account to protect Harold's bequest from exactly this kind of family drama. But it meant that anyone digging into my finances under the name Eleanor Hayes would find exactly what they expected: a retired cafeteria worker living on Social Security and a small pension. The drama reached its peak the week before what would have been Sarah's first wedding anniversary. Linda had been building pressure for months, calling family members, spreading rumors, and making increasingly bold claims about Harold's estate and my supposed deception. Then she made her fatal mistake. Linda hired a private investigator. I found out when the investigator, a nervous-looking man named Roger Walsh, showed up at my door with a clipboard and official-looking credentials. "Mrs. Hayes? I'm Roger Walsh from Walsh Investigations. I'm working on behalf of Linda Brennan regarding the estate of Harold Murphy. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about your recent financial activity." My blood turned to ice. Linda had actually hired someone to investigate me, to dig into my private affairs, and try to prove I was hiding money from the family. "I don't think I have anything to say to you," I said, starting to close the door. "Mrs. Brennan has some concerns about proper estate distribution," Walsh continued, putting his foot in the door. "She's worried that family members might not be receiving their fair share of Mr. Murphy's assets. She just wants to make sure everything is being handled properly. Linda Brennan was divorced from my brother for over 20 years. She has no claim on his estate. Actually, ma'am, that's not entirely accurate. In cases where there might have been hidden assets during the divorce proceedings, ex-spouses can have grounds for recovery. Mrs. Brennan believes your brother concealed significant wealth during their divorce, and now she's trying to make sure his final wishes are being honored. It was all lies, of course. Linda had no legal claim on Harold's estate, and she knew it. But she was hoping to intimidate me into giving her money to make her go away. Over the next few days, Walsh interviewed several of my neighbors, asking questions about my spending habits, any recent purchases, whether I'd seemed to have more money lately. He visited my bank, though they couldn't give him any information without a court order. He even called Sarah, introducing himself as someone looking into Harold's estate on behalf of the family. Sarah called me immediately after Walsh's call, and I could hear the stress in her voice. "Mom, what's going on?" "This investigator said Aunt Linda hired him because she's concerned about Uncle Harold's will. He asked me questions about your finances, about whether you'd given me any money lately or seemed to be spending more than usual." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you live on your retirement income and that you've never given me any large amounts of money." "But Mom, why is someone investigating you? What aren't you telling me?" I could hear my daughter starting to break. The stress of her divorce had barely healed, and now she was caught in the middle of family drama that threatened to tear apart the last stable relationship in her life. "Linda is trying to cause trouble," I said. "She thinks Harold owed her money from their divorce, and she's trying to pressure me into giving her something she's not entitled to. But if there's no money, why would she hire an investigator?" "Mom, please just tell me the truth. Did Uncle Harold leave you an inheritance?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. I could end all of this right now by telling Sarah the truth. I could explain about the $7 million, show her the documentation, prove that I wasn't hiding anything malicious from her. But I could also imagine what would happen next. Sarah would be shocked, maybe hurt that I'd kept such a huge secret. She might insist I share the money with Linda and the other family members to end the conflict. She might question every financial decision I'd made since Harold's death, wondering why I'd let her struggle when I could have helped. Worse, she might become a target herself. If Linda knew about the inheritance, she'd find ways to pressure Sarah directly, to make my daughter's life miserable until she convinced me to pay up. Harold left me a small bequest, I said carefully. Nothing significant, but Linda thinks she's entitled to part of it. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. $7 million wasn't small by any reasonable measure, but compared to Linda's fantasies of Harold's hidden wealth, it might seem modest. How small? Sarah asked. Small enough that it's not worth the family drama Linda is trying to create. 3 days later, Walsh called me with his findings. Mrs. Hayes, I've completed my investigation into your financial situation. I have to tell you, I found exactly what I expected to find for someone in your situation. Your bank records show a modest retirement income, some small savings, nothing unusual. Your neighbors describe you as someone who lives quietly and carefully manages her money. Relief flooded through me so strongly I had to sit down. So you found no evidence of any significant inheritance? None whatsoever. Your spending patterns haven't changed, your account balances are consistent with someone living on a fixed income, and there's no indication of any large financial transactions. Either you're the most careful money hider I've ever encountered, or Mrs. Brennan's information was incorrect. And what will you tell Linda? The truth. That my investigation found no evidence to support her claims about hidden wealth. Mrs. Hayes, between you and me, I think Mrs. Brennan was hoping to find something that wasn't there. Some people get desperate and see money where there isn't any. After Walsh hung up, I called Mr. Whitmore to thank him for his foresight in setting up the separate account. His careful planning had protected me from exactly this kind of family harassment. 2 days later, Linda showed up at my door again. But this time, the predatory confidence was gone. She looked defeated, hollow, like a woman who'd bet everything on a losing hand. Your investigator didn't find anything, she said without preamble. That's because there's nothing to find. Don't lie to me, Eleanor. I know Harold had money. I lived with him for 15 years. I know what he was worth. Maybe he did have money. Maybe he left it to charity or to Veronica, or invested it somewhere you don't know about. But he didn't leave it to me. Linda's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw the broken woman beneath all the anger and greed. I have nothing left, she whispered. My health insurance runs out next month. My house is mortgaged to the limit. I was counting on Harold owing me something, anything, to keep me afloat. Despite everything she'd put me through, I felt a stab of pity for her. Linda had built her whole life around Harold's success, and when he left her, she'd never learned to build something of her own. I'm sorry, I said gently. I truly am. But Harold's gone, and whatever he owed you died with him. Linda nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue that had seen better days. I'm sorry too, she said. For the investigator, for involving Sarah, for all of it. I was just so desperate. After she left, I thought she was done with us. I thought the failed investigation had convinced her to move on, to find another way to solve her financial problems. I was wrong. 2 days before what would have been Sarah's first wedding anniversary, my daughter called me sobbing. Mom, I can't do this anymore. I can't handle all this family drama on top of everything else. Aunt Linda called me again today, and this time she said things. She said terrible things about you and Uncle Harold. What kind of things? She said you and Harold were having an affair. She said that's why he left her, and that's why he left you money. She said you seduced him into changing his will, and that you've been lying to everyone about it. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Linda wasn't just after money anymore. She was trying to destroy my reputation and my relationship with my daughter out of pure spite. Sarah, you can't possibly believe. I don't know what to believe anymore. Sarah cried. Everyone keeps telling me different things about Uncle Harold and about you, and I'm caught in the middle of all these lies and accusations. I just want it to stop. Honey, listen to me. No, Mom. I can't listen to any more explanations or excuses or half-truths. I'm calling off any memorial plans for Uncle Harold. I'm cutting contact with Aunt Linda and all the other relatives who've been calling. And I need some space from you too, at least until I can figure out what's real and what isn't. The line went dead, and I sat staring at my phone in horror. Linda's campaign of revenge had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. She might not have gotten any money, but she'd managed to drive a wedge between me and the person I loved most in the world. That night, I lay awake wondering if I'd made the right choice in keeping Harold's inheritance secret. The money was supposed to protect Sarah, to keep her safe from people like Marcus and Linda who would use her as a way to get to wealth. But instead, my secret had become a weapon that Linda wielded against both of us. My daughter was questioning everything about our relationship, wondering if her own mother was capable of the kind of betrayal Linda had suggested. For the first time since Mr. Whitmore had knocked on my door with news of Harold's bequest, I wondered if $7 million was worth losing my daughter's trust. But as I thought about Linda's desperation, about Marcus's calculated greed, about all the family members who'd suddenly remembered my existence when they smelled money, I knew I'd made the right choice. Some secrets are kept not to deceive, but to protect. And sometimes the people you're protecting don't understand that until it's too late. The damage was almost done, but not quite. Sarah was hurt and confused, but she wasn't lost to me yet. And Linda's lies would eventually crumble under their own weight, just like Marcus's schemes had. I just had to hold on long enough for the truth to surface, and pray that when it did, my daughter would forgive me for the secret I'd kept to keep her safe. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. 6 months after the Linda disaster finally died down, Sarah met David Wellington Hayes at a charity book drive her school was hosting. I should have known trouble was brewing the moment she mentioned his last name was hyphenated. Sarah had been healing slowly from the Marcus betrayal, and the family drama Linda had stirred up. She'd forgiven me for keeping Harold's estate matters private, understanding finally that I'd been trying to protect her from exactly the kind of vultures who'd circled us for months. We were closer than ever, having weathered that storm together. David seemed like a godsend at first. He was everything Marcus hadn't been: genuinely kind, interested in Sarah's work as a teacher, and completely uninterested in my financial situation. He taught high school English at a private academy across town and spent his weekends volunteering at literacy programs. When Sarah brought him to Sunday dinner, he insisted on helping with dishes and asked thoughtful questions about my years working in the school cafeteria. "It must have been rewarding," he said, drying a plate with careful attention. "Knowing you were providing nutrition for kids who might not get proper meals otherwise. That's important work." I liked him immediately. David had an easy way about him, a genuine warmth that made you want to trust him. He looked at Sarah like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met, and he listened when she talked about her students with the kind of attention that suggested he actually cared about her thoughts. After 3 months of dating, David proposed with his grandmother's ring and a speech about building a life together based on shared values and mutual respect. Sarah glowed with happiness in a way I hadn't seen since before Marcus entered her life. That's when I met Patricia Wellington Hayes. The name should have been my first warning. Anyone who hyphenated their married name and insisted others use both parts was probably someone who took themselves very seriously indeed. Patricia invited us to lunch at the country club to properly meet Sarah's family. The invitation was addressed to Miss Sarah Hayes and mother, not even bothering to use my first name. I should have declined right then. The Riverside Country Club was exactly what you'd expect from a place that charged $50,000 just to join. Crystal chandeliers, oriental rugs, and waiters who glided between tables like they were performing ballet. Every woman in the dining room wore jewelry that cost more than my annual grocery budget, and every conversation was conducted in the kind of hushed tones that suggested important people discussing important things. Patricia was holding court at a corner table, surrounded by enough fresh flowers to stock a funeral home. She was a handsome woman in her early 60s, with silver hair styled in a perfect bob and a navy suit that probably cost more than my car. Everything about her screamed old money and older expectations. "Sarah, darling," she said, rising to offer air kisses that didn't actually touch Sarah's cheeks. "And you must be Eleanor. How nice to finally meet you." The pause before nice lasted just long enough to suggest she'd considered several other adjectives and settled on the most diplomatic option. "Thank you for inviting us," I said, taking the seat she indicated with a wave of her manicured hand. "Oh, it's important that we get to know each other, don't you think? After all, we'll be family soon." Patricia smiled, but her eyes remained calculating. "David has told me so much about Sarah's work. Teaching is such a noble profession. Not particularly lucrative, of course, but noble." Sarah's cheeks flushed. "I love what I do." "Of course you do, dear. David has always been attracted to people with strong charitable instincts. It's wonderful that you've both chosen careers in public service, even if it means certain financial limitations. The first shot had been fired, disguised as a compliment, but clearly meant to establish the economic hierarchy. I watched Sarah's confidence begin to wilt under Patricia's seemingly supportive words. Lunch continued in the same vein. Patricia ordered for the table without asking our preferences, recommended wine that cost more per glass than I typically spent on a bottle, and peppered the conversation with casual references to family properties, investment portfolios, and social connections that were clearly meant to emphasize the gulf between their family's circumstances and ours. David's trust fund matures next year, she mentioned while discussing wedding timelines. Nothing enormous, of course, just enough to ensure he and Sarah won't have to worry about money while they're establishing their careers. Though I suppose that will be quite a change for Sarah, having that kind of security. Sarah's never been motivated by money, I said carefully. Oh, I'm sure that's true. But let's be practical. Financial stress can be such a burden on young marriages. David's father and I want to make sure they start their life together with every possible advantage. What she meant, of course, was that David would be supporting Sarah, and by extension, potentially supporting me if I became a burden in my old age. The implication hung in the air like expensive perfume, cloying and impossible to ignore. After lunch, Patricia walked us to the parking lot, where my 10-year-old Honda sat between a Mercedes and a BMW like a poor relation at a family reunion. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but I think it's wonderful that you've raised Sarah to be so independent. These days, it's important for young women to have careers, even if marriage means they won't need to rely on them financially. The condescension in her voice made my teeth ache. Patricia was telling me, in the politest possible terms, that she expected my daughter to become financially dependent on her son, transforming from a self-sufficient professional into a kept woman whose primary job would be maintaining David's comfort. Over the next few weeks, Patricia inserted herself into every aspect of wedding planning with the subtlety of a steamroller. She had opinions about everything: the venue, the flowers, the music, the guest list, and somehow managed to frame each suggestion as a generous offer while making it clear that David's family would be footing most of the bill. The Wellington Hayes family has used Belmont Manor for weddings for 3 generations, she announced during our first official planning meeting. It's a bit expensive, but David's father and I would be happy to cover the venue costs. We couldn't possibly ask Sarah's family to contribute to something so far beyond their means. Sarah looked mortified. Mrs. Wellington Hayes, we were thinking of something smaller. Nonsense. David is our only son. This wedding will be talked about for years, and we want it to reflect the kind of family Sarah is marrying into. Think of it as our gift to both of you. A gift that came with strings attached, clearly. Patricia was ensuring that every guest would know exactly who had paid for the elaborate celebration, and by extension, who held the financial power in this new family dynamic. The venue she'd chosen was stunning, a restored 19th-century mansion with formal gardens and enough space for 300 guests. The base rental fee alone was $30,000, not including catering, flowers, or any of the other expenses that would turn this into a 6-figure affair. We'll need to discuss the guest list carefully, Patricia continued, producing a leather-bound planner that looked like it could run a small corporation. The Wellington Hayes family will invite roughly 200 people, business associates, family friends, club members. I assume Sarah's list will be considerably smaller. We were thinking of about 50 people, Sarah said quietly. Family and close friends. Perfect. That will leave plenty of room for David's social obligations. It's important that his professional relationships be properly maintained, especially as he moves into higher levels of education administration. I blinked. I thought David was happy teaching. Patricia's laugh tinkled like wind chimes in a hurricane. Oh, teaching is fine for now, but David has so much potential. With the right connections and proper support, he could easily move into private school administration, maybe even educational consulting. The contacts he makes at this wedding could be crucial for his future. She was already planning David's career advancement, using the wedding as a networking opportunity and dismissing his actual passions as temporary inconveniences. I wondered if David knew his mother was treating his marriage as a business investment. The next few planning sessions grew progressively more uncomfortable. Patricia had opinions about Sarah's dress, something classic, nothing too trendy. The flowers, white roses are always appropriate. And even the music, nothing too contemporary, we want this to feel elegant. Every suggestion came wrapped in backhanded compliments and gentle corrections that left Sarah feeling smaller and less capable of making her own decisions. Patricia was systematically erasing my daughter's personality from her own wedding, replacing it with Wellington Hayes family traditions and expectations. The breaking point came during a discussion about the wedding party. David will have his fraternity brothers as groomsmen, naturally, Patricia said, consulting her ever-present planner. And Sarah, dear, I've been thinking about your bridesmaids. You'll want to choose carefully. These photos will be displayed in our home for years to come. I was planning to ask my college roommate Jessica and my cousin Amy, Sarah said. Patricia's smile became strained. Of course. Though I wonder if we might consider asking David's sister Caroline as well. She's just finished her master's degree at Yale, and she'd photograph beautifully. Plus, it would mean so much to the family. It wasn't really a suggestion. Patricia was telling Sarah to include Caroline Wellington Hayes in her wedding party, expanding the group to accommodate family politics rather than personal relationships. And what about your dress, Eleanor? Patricia asked, turning to me with the kind of attention a scientist might give to an interesting specimen. Have you given any thought to what you'll wear? I haven't started looking yet. Well, you'll want to coordinate with my outfit, naturally. The mothers should complement each other without competing. I'll be wearing Chanel, a pale blue ensemble that belonged to David's grandmother. Perhaps you could find something in a nice gray or beige. Something modest that won't distract from the bridal party. The implication was clear. I should dress like furniture, present but unobtrusive, certainly nothing that might suggest I belonged in the same social sphere as the Wellington Hayes family. Actually, Patricia continued, her voice taking on a tone of helpful concern, I've been thinking about your situation, Eleanor. This must all be quite overwhelming. The expense, the social expectations, the need to fit into David's world. I want you to know that we understand your limitations. My limitations? Financial, dear. Emotional. Social. It's perfectly natural to feel out of your depth when your daughter marries into a family like ours. David's father and I have discussed it, and we'd like to help. She reached into her purse and pulled out a silver card case, extracting what looked like a credit card and sliding it across the table. This is for Nordstrom. Consider it our gift to you, for your dress, shoes, whatever you need to feel appropriate at the wedding. We certainly can't have you feeling underdressed or uncomfortable at such an important family event. The card sat between us like a small bomb. Patricia was offering to pay for my wedding attire because she assumed I couldn't afford to dress myself properly for my own daughter's wedding. The gesture was wrapped in kindness, but the message was brutal. I was a charity case who needed the Wellington Hayes family's financial intervention to participate in their social circle. That's very generous, I managed, but I'll handle my own expenses. Oh, but I insist. This is as much our celebration as yours, and we want everyone to feel comfortable. Consider it an investment in family harmony. Family harmony. Code for don't embarrass us in front of our friends. Sarah was staring at the table, her face flushed with mortification. She understood exactly what Patricia was saying, that her mother was too poor to dress appropriately for her own daughter's wedding, that the Wellington Hayes family was graciously stepping in to prevent a social embarrassment. I appreciate the thought, I said, sliding the card back toward Patricia, but I'll find something suitable on my own. Patricia's smile became arctic. Of course. I just want to make sure you understand the level of formality we're aiming for. This isn't a casual family gathering. There will be judges, business leaders, people who are accustomed to a certain standard. I'd hate for you to feel out of place. The threat was delivered with perfect politeness, but it was still a threat. Dress appropriately or risk embarrassing yourself and your daughter in front of David's important connections. That evening, Sarah called me crying. Mom, I don't know what to do. Mrs. Wellington Hayes means well, but she's taking over everything. This doesn't feel like my wedding anymore. It feels like a Wellington Hayes family production that I'm lucky to be invited to. What does David say about all this? He says his mother gets excited about family events, and that she'll calm down once the planning is finished. But Mom, she makes me feel like I'm not good enough for her son, like I should be grateful that their family is willing to accept someone like me. Someone like her. A teacher from a modest background whose mother worked in a cafeteria and lived in a small house in an unfashionable neighborhood. Someone who didn't have a trust fund or country club membership or the right connections to advance her husband's career. Honey, you are more than good enough. You're educated, successful, kind, and you make David happy. If his mother can't see that, it's her loss. But what if she's right? What if I am marrying above my station? What if David eventually realizes he could have done better? Patricia's poison was working. She was systematically destroying my daughter's self-confidence, making her question her own worth and David's love. This wasn't about wedding planning. It was about establishing a power dynamic that would define Sarah's marriage for years to come. The situation escalated 3 weeks later at the engagement party Patricia insisted on hosting at the country club. The guest list was dominated by Wellington Hayes' family friends and David's professional colleagues, with Sarah's people clearly outnumbered and outclassed. I wore a simple black dress that I'd owned for years, but had always made me feel elegant. Nothing fancy, but appropriate for any formal occasion. Patricia greeted me wearing diamonds that could have funded a small school district, and a smile that suggested she was counting the ways I fell short of her expectations. "Eleanor, how lovely. And what an interesting choice. Black is so practical." The party was everything Sarah had feared: formal, intimidating, and designed to showcase the Wellington Hayes family's social prominence rather than celebrate her engagement to David. Patricia introduced Sarah to guest after guest as David's little teacher, emphasizing her profession in a way that made it sound like a hobby rather than a career. I spent the evening watching my daughter navigate conversations with people who clearly considered her an amusing novelty: David's charitable choice to marry outside his social class. She handled it with grace, but I could see the strain in her smile and the way she unconsciously deferred to David in every interaction. The final straw came when Patricia cornered me near the bar. "Eleanor, we need to have a frank conversation about expectations." "What kind of expectations?" "I know your type," she said, dropping the pretense of politeness. "Single mothers who've struggled financially, worked hard to raise their children, and now see marriage as a solution to their problems. You're probably hoping Sarah's marriage will solve your little financial difficulties." The accusation hit me like a slap. Patricia was accusing me of pushing Sarah into marriage for my own financial benefit, of using my daughter as a meal ticket to a better life. "You're mistaken," I said carefully. "Am I?" "Let me be clear about something. The Wellington Hayes family takes care of its own, but we don't extend that care to in-laws who see us as an ATM. Don't expect any handouts from our family. David's trust fund is for him and Sarah, not for supporting extended family members who might need help with retirement or medical bills." She was establishing boundaries, making it clear that I shouldn't expect financial help from David's family, even if I found myself in genuine need. The message was brutal in its clarity. You're not really family, you're a potential liability who needs to be managed. I've never asked for anything from your family. Not yet, but I know how these situations develop. First it's help with small expenses, then maybe assistance with home repairs or medical bills. Before you know it, we're supporting an entire extended family because David is too kind-hearted to say no. The conversation was interrupted by David himself, who appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of wine and a confused expression. "Mom, what are you two discussing so seriously?" "Just getting to know each other better," Patricia said, her social mask sliding back into place. "Eleanor and I were talking about family dynamics and how to maintain healthy boundaries." David looked between us, clearly sensing tension but unsure of its source. "Well, I hope you're both getting along. It means everything to me that the important women in my life like each other." Patricia's smile could have powered a small city. "Of course, darling. Eleanor and I understand each other perfectly." After David walked away, Patricia delivered her final blow. "I'm going to make this very simple for you, Eleanor. You can choose to be gracious about your daughter's good fortune, or you can be a problem that needs to be solved. If you're gracious, you'll attend family events when invited, stay in your lane, and remember that this marriage is about David and Sarah, not about your social advancement. And if I'm a problem, then David will have to choose between his wife's happiness and his mother's comfort. And I've been in his life a lot longer than Sarah has." The threat was delivered with perfect composure, but it was still a threat. Patricia was telling me she'd make David choose between his mother and his wife if I didn't accept my subordinate position in the family hierarchy. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, furious beyond words. Patricia Wellington Hayes had insulted me, threatened me, and made it clear she considered my daughter's marriage to her son an act of charity rather than love. The worst part was that I couldn't defend myself without revealing Harold's inheritance. I could have told Patricia that I had enough money to buy her precious country club membership several times over, that her son's trust fund was pocket change compared to what I had sitting in the bank under my maiden name. But revealing the money would have solved nothing and created new problems. Patricia would have wondered why I'd been hiding wealth, would have questioned my motives, and might have poisoned David against Sarah by suggesting she'd deliberately deceived him about our financial situation. More importantly, the money wasn't the point. Patricia's behavior wasn't really about economics, it was about power, status, and control. She wanted to establish herself as the dominant force in David's life, with Sarah as a grateful subordinate who knew her place in the family hierarchy. Instead of fighting back, I watched and waited. Over the next few weeks, Patricia's true character began to reveal itself in ways that even David couldn't ignore. She criticized Sarah's wedding dress choice, too simple for such an important occasion, questioned her career plans, surely you'll want to focus on family after the wedding, and made increasingly pointed comments about appropriate expectations for their future life together. The breaking point came during a family dinner at the Wellington Hayes estate. Patricia had invited Sarah and me to dinner to discuss final wedding details, but the evening quickly became an interrogation about Sarah's intentions and capabilities as a wife. "Sarah, dear, have you given any thought to learning proper entertaining skills? David will need to host dinner parties for his professional advancement, and it's important that you know how to manage these events properly." "I've hosted dinner parties before," Sarah said quietly. "Oh, I'm sure you have. But there's a difference between having friends over for pasta and hosting a formal dinner for 12 with proper service and conversation management. Perhaps I could arrange for you to take some classes?" Patricia was suggesting that Sarah needed training to be a suitable wife for her son, that my daughter's natural social skills weren't adequate for the Wellington Hayes family's standards. David, who had been quiet through most of the evening, finally spoke up. "Mom, Sarah doesn't need classes. She's perfectly capable of handling any social situation." "Of course she is, darling. I'm just offering to help her polish her skills for the more formal entertaining you'll be doing. It's different when you're representing a family with certain social obligations." "What social obligations?" "I'm a high school teacher, not a diplomat." Patricia's laugh was tinkling and condescending. "For now, yes. But you have so much potential, David. With the right support and proper networking, you could easily move into administration, maybe even educational consulting. The connections you make through marriage are important for career advancement." I watched David's face change as he realized his mother was treating his marriage as a career move rather than a personal choice. She was planning his future without consulting him, assuming she knew better than he did what would make him happy. "I like teaching, Mom. I don't want to be an administrator." "Don't be silly. Teaching is fine for gaining experience, but you can't spend your whole career in a classroom. People of our background are expected to take leadership roles, to make a real impact rather than just serving individual students." Patricia was dismissing David's chosen profession as beneath his social station, suggesting that teaching was temporary employment suitable only for gaining experience before moving on to more appropriate work. "Teaching is making a real impact," David said, his voice tight with anger. "Every day I help kids discover literature, think critically, and express themselves clearly. That's not just a stepping stone to something better. It's exactly what I want to be doing." The argument that followed was uncomfortable and revealing. Patricia couldn't understand why her son would choose a service profession when he had the connections and resources to pursue more prestigious work. David couldn't understand why his mother valued status over satisfaction, prestige over passion. By the end of the evening, David was quiet and thoughtful in a way that suggested he was seeing his mother's expectations with new eyes. The final confrontation came a week before the wedding, when Patricia made the mistake of criticizing Sarah within David's hearing. Sarah had been struggling with wedding stress and family pressure, losing weight and sleeping poorly as the elaborate celebration grew beyond anything she'd ever wanted. She looked fragile and overwhelmed, like a woman drowning in other people's expectations. Patricia chose that moment to corner her at the final dress fitting, with David waiting outside the bridal shop. "Sarah, I need to speak frankly with you about marriage expectations. David is accustomed to a certain level of comfort and sophistication. I hope you understand that being his wife means more than just loving him. It means representing our family appropriately." Through the thin walls of the fitting room, David heard every word of his mother's lecture about Sarah's inadequacies and the improvements she'd need to make to be a suitable Wellington Hayes wife. He also heard Sarah crying quietly as Patricia continued her list of deficiencies and required corrections. When Patricia emerged from the fitting room, looking satisfied with her work, she found David waiting with an expression that could have melted steel. "We need to talk," he said. The conversation that followed was 20 years in the making. David told his mother exactly what he thought of her condescending attitude towards Sarah, her attempts to control his career, and her assumption that love should be secondary to social advancement. "If you can't treat Sarah with respect," he said finally, "then you won't be welcome at our wedding. And if you can't accept that I'm marrying the woman I love, not the woman you think I should marry, then you won't be welcome in our life together." Patricia was shocked into silence. She'd never imagined that her precious son would choose a teacher from a modest background over his own mother's preferences and expectations. The wedding proceeded as planned, but with a noticeably smaller guest list. Patricia attended, but she was subdued and careful, clearly understanding that her position in David's life had fundamentally changed. Sarah bloomed into the radiant bride she was meant to be, free from the constant criticism and corrections that had been weighing her down. David stood beside her looking like a man who'd finally learned to prioritize his own happiness over other people's expectations. I watched from the front row, wearing a beautiful blue dress I'd bought with my own money, grateful that I'd kept quiet about Harold's inheritance. The money sitting in my bank account had given me the strength to endure Patricia's insults without fighting back, knowing I didn't need the Wellington Hayes family's approval or financial support. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people reveal their true character while you maintain your dignity. Patricia had shown David exactly who she was and what she valued, and he'd chosen love over status, authenticity over appearances. The $7 million remained my secret, but it had served its purpose in an unexpected way. Knowing I had financial security had allowed me to weather Patricia's storms without bending, to protect Sarah's happiness without compromising my own integrity. My daughter married for love, not money, and her husband chose her over his family's expectations. Sometimes that's worth more than all the trust funds in the world. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? Thank you as you do so. 2 years after Sarah's beautiful wedding to David, I thought we'd finally found peace. David had proven himself to be everything a mother could want for her daughter: loving, supportive, and completely uninterested in anyone's financial situation. Patricia had learned to keep her opinions to herself, and Sarah was glowing with the happiness that comes from being truly cherished. Then Sarah's college friend Emma threw a housewarming party, and everything changed. "Mom, I want you to meet someone," Sarah said, practically bouncing with excitement as she called me the next morning. "His name is James, and he's absolutely wonderful." Emma introduced us at the party, and we talked for hours. My heart sank. Not because Sarah was happy, she deserved friendship and joy in her life, but because there was something in her voice that reminded me of how she'd sounded when she first met Marcus. That breathless enthusiasm that made smart women overlook red flags. "He's different from anyone I've ever met," Sarah continued. "Sophisticated, well-traveled, and so interesting. He knows about art and literature, and he actually listened when I talked about my students. Really listened, you know? That's nice, sweetheart. What does he do for work?" "He's in business consulting. He helps families with financial planning and estate management." "Isn't that perfect? I mean, after everything we've been through with family financial drama, it's nice to meet someone who understands those complications." Financial planning, estate management. The words sent ice through my veins, but I kept my voice neutral. How did Emma know him? He's her cousin's friend from college. They were roommates at Yale, and he moved here about 6 months ago for work. "Mom, he's taking me to dinner tomorrow night, and I was wondering if you'd like to meet him soon. He specifically asked about you." "He asked about me?" "He said he believes in doing things properly, that a man should get to know a woman's family before pursuing anything serious." "Isn't that sweet?" "Sweet. Or calculating." But I couldn't voice my suspicions without sounding paranoid, especially after the Marcus situation had made me seem overprotective. I met James Mitchell 3 days later when Sarah brought him to Sunday dinner. He was everything she'd described: handsome in a polished way, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of easy confidence that suggested success and education. He brought flowers for me and wine for dinner, complimented my pot roast, and asked thoughtful questions about my years working in the school system. "Sarah tells me you were dedicated to your job for over 30 years, he said, helping clear the dinner dishes. "That kind of commitment is rare these days. You must have some wonderful stories about watching kids grow up." He seemed genuinely interested in my answers, laughing at the right moments and asking follow-up questions that suggested he was actually paying attention. It was only later that I realized how smoothly he'd steered the conversation toward my retirement, my financial security, and my family history. "Sarah mentioned you lost your brother recently. James said as we settled in the living room with coffee. I'm sorry for your loss. Were you too close? We had our differences over the years, but family is family. Of course. It's always difficult when family relationships are complicated. I imagine there were practical matters to handle after his passing. Estate issues, legal paperwork. That kind of thing can be overwhelming when you're grieving. Sarah jumped in before I could answer. Mom had to deal with some lawyer visits and paperwork, but nothing too complicated. Uncle Harold wasn't really part of our lives the last few years. Still, even simple estates can involve unexpected complications, James said, his attention focused on me with laser intensity. Did you need legal representation, or were you able to handle everything directly with his attorneys? It was straightforward enough, I said carefully. That's fortunate. Some lawyers take advantage of grieving family members, especially when there are assets involved. You seem too smart for that, though. I imagine you're quite financially savvy after managing a household on a single income for so many years. Financially savvy. The phrase stuck with me long after James left that evening, accompanied by Sarah's glowing commentary on how wonderful it was that he cared about her family. Over the next few weeks, James became a regular presence in our lives. He took Sarah to nice restaurants, brought her flowers, and treated her with the kind of attention that made her bloom like a flower in sunlight. He was everything Marcus hadn't been. Genuinely interested in her thoughts, supportive of her career, and apparently unimpressed by wealth or status. But every conversation we had eventually circled back to family finances, investment strategies, and estate planning. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem remarkably secure for someone living on a fixed income, he said during one of their visits. Sarah mentioned you've been able to help with some of her expenses, and you clearly manage your resources well. Have you considered any investment opportunities to grow your retirement savings? I'm pretty conservative with money. That's smart. Too many people chase risky investments and lose everything. But there are safe options that could help stretch your retirement funds, especially if you have any lump sums sitting in savings accounts earning basically nothing. Lump sums, like an inheritance from a deceased brother. You know, if you ever want to discuss financial planning, I'd be happy to take a look at your situation, James continued. No charge, of course. I believe in taking care of family, and Sarah's happiness is important to me. The offer was generous and seemed sincere, but something about the way James's eyes lit up when discussing money made my skin crawl. It reminded me too much of Marcus's calculating interest in our financial situation. My suspicions deepened when James started asking Sarah detailed questions about our family history. Tell me about your Uncle Harold, he said during a dinner at my house. Sarah mentioned he was successful in business. What kind of work did he do? Real estate development, Sarah answered. He made quite a bit of money over the years, but he and Mom didn't stay in touch much. That's unfortunate. Family rifts can be so painful. I hope his passing gave you both some closure, even if the relationship was complicated. Actually, it did, Sarah said, squeezing my hand. Mom handled all the final arrangements, and it helped us both process some old family issues. That must have been emotionally exhausting. And probably expensive too, funeral costs, legal fees, travel expenses. I hope Harold's estate covered those kinds of final expenses. We managed fine, I said. Of course you did. Though it would have been nice if Harold had acknowledged the family rift and made some gesture to help with those costs. Sometimes people leave small bequests to relatives they've been estranged from, as a way of apologizing or making amends. James was fishing, trying to determine if Harold had left me anything without asking directly. His questions were casual and sympathetic, but they all pointed toward the same goal: figuring out whether our family had recently come into money. The conversation that finally convinced me James was dangerous happened 3 weeks later, when he brought up my late husband unprompted. Sarah tells me your husband passed away when she was in high school, he said while we waited for Sarah to finish getting ready for their date. That must have been incredibly difficult, raising a teenager alone while dealing with your own grief. It was challenging, but we got through it. I imagine there were financial pressures too. Life insurance, survivor benefits, maybe some savings you had to manage carefully to make sure Sarah could finish school and go to college. We were fine. You did an amazing job. Sarah turned out to be such a remarkable woman, and that's a reflection of your strength and planning. I hope your husband had good life insurance coverage. It makes such a difference for families when they don't have to worry about money during the worst moments of their lives. Life insurance. Another potential source of money James was trying to identify and quantify. That night, I lay awake thinking about every conversation I'd had with James Mitchell. Every casual question about family finances, every sympathetic inquiry about Harold's estate, every compliment about my financial management skills. He wasn't just making conversation. He was conducting an investigation. I called my private investigator the next morning. Frank Rodriguez had helped me during the Linda situation, and I trusted him to be discreet. I need you to look into someone, I told him. James Mitchell, business consultant, moved here about 6 months ago from out of state. I want to know everything about him. What's your concern? He's dating my daughter, and something doesn't feel right about his interest in our family's financial situation. Inheritance hunters are more common than people think, Frank said grimly. Give me a week. 5 days later, Frank called with news that made my blood run cold. Eleanor, you need to hear this. James Mitchell is a professional scam artist who targets women from families he suspects have recently inherited money. He's done this at least 3 times that I can document. My worst fears were confirmed, but hearing them out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. Tell me everything. His real name is James Michael Torres. He changes the last name depending on where he's working, but the pattern is always the same. He identifies families who've recently lost wealthy relatives, moves to their area, and systematically targets unmarried women in those families. How does he identify the families? Public records, obituaries, court filings, real estate transactions. He does months of research before making contact. In your case, he probably spotted Harold's obituary, did some digging into the family connections, and identified Sarah as his target. What happened to the other women? Frank's pause told me everything I needed to know. 2 of them married him. One in Phoenix 3 years ago, another in Denver 2 years ago. Both women came from families with substantial inheritances. Both ended up divorced within 18 months, with James claiming half their assets in the settlement. And the third? She got suspicious and ended the relationship before marriage. James disappeared immediately after she confronted him about his background. What about his business? The consulting work? Fake. He has some credentials and references, but they're all manufactured. James is very good at what he does. He creates complete identities, establishes himself in communities, and presents himself as exactly the kind of man his targets are looking for. My hands were shaking as I took notes. How did he know about Harold's inheritance? That's the scary part. James has connections with people who monitor legal filings, estate proceedings, and probate records. He probably knew about Harold's will before you did. He's been planning this approach for months. What's his endgame? Marriage, followed by a systematic campaign to identify and access any inheritance money. He's patient. He'll spend a year or more building trust, getting involved in family finances, and positioning himself to claim half of everything when the divorce happens. Does he actually care about Sarah at all? Eleanor, to James, Sarah is a business opportunity. Nothing more. After Frank hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the evidence he'd promised to deliver by courier. Photos of James with other women, copies of marriage and divorce records, documentation of his pattern of targeting inheritance recipients. I had to tell Sarah, but I also knew it would destroy her. She was already talking about James like he might be the one, already making plans for introducing him to David and planning double dates. She'd invested her heart in someone who saw her as nothing more than a path to money he didn't even know existed. The situation became urgent 2 weeks later when James escalated his timeline. Mom, James proposed. Sarah called me, crying with happiness. Can you believe it? It's only been 4 months, but he says when you know, you know. He can't wait to start our life together. For months. Just like Frank had warned me. James was moving fast, trying to lock down the relationship before anyone could investigate his background too thoroughly. That's wonderful, sweetheart. When are you thinking about having the wedding? That's the amazing part. James wants to get married next month. He says he's tired of waiting for happiness, and he doesn't want a big ceremony. Just something simple and intimate, maybe at City Hall with family. Next month. No time for background checks, no opportunity for family members to ask questions or voice concerns. James was trying to rush Sarah into marriage before anyone could interfere with his plans. Isn't that a little fast, honey? I know it seems quick, but James is older and more mature than the men I usually date. He knows what he wants, and he wants me. Why should we wait when we're both sure? Because he's a con artist who's done this before, I wanted to scream. Because he's researched our family like a predator stalking prey. Because he doesn't love you. He loves the money he thinks you'll inherit. But I couldn't say any of that without proof Sarah would believe. Have you told David yet? James and I are having dinner with him and David tomorrow night. James is so excited to officially become part of the family. The family dinner was excruciating. James was charming and attentive, talking about his plans for the future and how much he was looking forward to building a life with Sarah. He mentioned wanting children, buying a house, and creating the kind of stable family environment Sarah deserved. He also casually brought up financial planning again. Eleanor, I've been thinking about what we discussed regarding your retirement investments. After Sarah and I are married, I'd love to help you review your portfolio and make sure you're getting the best possible returns on your savings. That's very thoughtful, David said. But Eleanor seems to manage her finances quite well on her own. Of course she does, James agreed quickly. I just know how complicated estate planning can be, especially for someone who's recently lost a family member. Sometimes there are tax implications or investment opportunities that aren't immediately obvious. He was laying the groundwork for getting access to my financial information after marriage, positioning himself as the helpful son-in-law who just wanted to make sure I was making smart decisions with Harold's inheritance. Actually, James continued, I was thinking it might be helpful for Sarah and me to have power of attorney arrangements with you, Eleanor. Just as a safety net, in case anything happens to you down the road. It would make sure someone you trust can handle your affairs if you're ever unable to do so yourself. Power of attorney. The ultimate goal. James wanted legal access to my finances, positioned as a caring family arrangement, but actually designed to give him control over Harold's $7 million. That's very thoughtful, I said carefully, but I'm not ready to think about those kinds of arrangements yet. Of course not. I just like to plan ahead, make sure all the important people in my life are protected. We can discuss it after the wedding, when we're officially family. That night I made my decision. Sarah deserved to know the truth about James, even if it broke her heart. I asked her to come over for lunch the next day, telling her I had some important things to discuss about the engagement. She arrived glowing with happiness, full of wedding plans and dreams about her future with James. Mom, I know this is happening fast, but I've never been so sure about anything in my life. James makes me feel safe and cherished in a way I've never experienced before. Honey, I need you to sit down. There are some things about James that you need to know. I showed her everything Frank had discovered. The photos, the documents, the evidence of James's previous marriages and divorces. I explained how he'd systematically targeted our family after researching Harold's estate, how every conversation about finances had been designed to gather information about potential inheritance money. Sarah's face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, confusion, anger, and finally devastation. This can't be true, she whispered, staring at a photo of James embracing another woman at their wedding 2 years earlier. He loves me. He knows everything about me, my dreams, my fears. You can't fake that kind of connection. Sweetheart, James is very good at what he does. He studies his targets, learns what they want to hear, and becomes exactly the man they're looking for. But he's never asked me for money. He pays for everything when we go out. He's generous and thoughtful. Because he's playing a long game. He wants to marry you first, then gradually gain access to family finances through me. The inheritance he's really after belongs to me, not you. Sarah's hands were shaking as she read through Frank's report. He said he wanted power of attorney arrangements. He said it was just for protection. It would have given him legal access to my finances. That's been his goal from the beginning. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest of my life. I watched my daughter's heart break in real time as she processed the evidence of James's deception. She cried for the relationship she'd thought was real, for the future she'd been planning, for the man she'd believed loved her for herself. How could I be so stupid? She sobbed. After Marcus, after everything I learned about protecting myself, how could I fall for another con artist? Because James is a professional, and because you have a loving heart that wants to see the best in people. That's not stupidity. That's one of your greatest strengths. But I was about to marry him. I was about to give him access to our family, to you, to everything. But you didn't. We caught him before he could do any real damage. Sarah stayed with me for the rest of the day, crying and processing and slowly accepting the truth about James's deception. That evening, she called him and told him the engagement was off, that she'd discovered his real identity and his pattern of targeting women for their family money. James didn't even try to deny it. According to Sarah, he simply said, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and hung up. By the next morning, his apartment was empty and his phone number was disconnected. Frank confirmed a week later that James Michael Torres had vanished completely, probably moving on to another city and another identity to target his next victim. Sarah grieved for weeks, not just for the relationship, but for the violation of trust and the realization that someone had seen her as nothing more than a business opportunity. She questioned her judgment, her ability to read people, her worthiness of genuine love. But gradually she healed. David and Patricia, who surprised everyone by being genuinely supportive during the crisis, rallied around her, and she slowly began to trust her instincts again. "Mom," she said one evening as we sat in my garden watching the sunset, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course. Is there something about Uncle Harold's inheritance that you haven't told me? Something that would make people like James target our family?" The question I'd been dreading since the day Mr. Whitmore knocked on my door. Sarah deserved the truth, but I also knew that knowledge of the $7 million would change everything. Her sense of security, her relationships, her ability to trust that people cared about her for herself. "Harold left me more than I initially let on," I said carefully. "Enough that it might attract the wrong kind of attention if people knew about it." "How much more?" I looked at my daughter, this strong, beautiful woman who'd survived 2 predators trying to use her for financial gain, and made my decision. "Enough that you'll never have to worry about money, but not so much that it should change how you live your life or who you trust." Sarah nodded, understanding the delicate balance I was trying to maintain. "Thank you for protecting me," she said. "From James, from Marcus, from all the people who would see dollar signs instead of me. That's what mothers do, sweetheart. We keep our children safe, even when they don't know they need protecting." The $7 million remained mostly secret, but it had served its purpose once again. Having that financial security had given me the resources to investigate James thoroughly and the strength to devastate my daughter's heart in order to save her life. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is keep a secret that protects the people you care about from predators who would destroy them for money they don't even know exists. James was gone, but Sarah was safe. And in the end, that was worth more than all the inheritance money in the world. 1 year after the James disaster, Sarah met Tom Bradley at a teachers' conference in Chicago. She called me that evening, her voice bright with the kind of cautious excitement that comes after you've learned to be careful with your heart. "Mom, I met someone today. His name is Tom, and he teaches 4th grade at a school about an hour from here. We spent the whole afternoon talking about education reform and childhood literacy, and it felt so normal. So real. Normal. Real. After Marcus's calculated charm and James's predatory sophistication, normal sounded like exactly what Sarah needed. Tom turned out to be everything his first impressions suggested: genuine, kind, and completely uninterested in anything beyond Sarah's beautiful mind and generous heart. He was tall and lean with laugh lines around his eyes, the kind of man who wore khakis and button-down shirts not because they were fashionable, but because they were practical for a classroom environment. When Sarah brought him to meet me 3 months later, he arrived with a potted plant instead of flowers. "I thought you might enjoy watching it grow," helped with dinner preparation without being asked, and spent 20 minutes discussing different approaches to reaching struggling readers. Not once did he mention money, inheritance, or financial planning. "Mrs. Hayes," he said as we cleaned up after dinner, "Sarah tells me you worked in school nutrition for 30 years. That's incredible dedication. I see how much the cafeteria staff means to our students. Sometimes you're the most consistent adult presence in a kid's life." Tom understood the importance of what I'd done, saw dignity in work that people like Patricia Wellington Hayes had dismissed as service employment. He valued substance over status, character over connections. Over the next 18 months, I watched Sarah bloom in a way I'd never seen before. Tom brought out her natural confidence, encouraged her professional ambitions, and treated her like an equal partner in every decision. When they talked about the future, it was always we and our shared dreams built on mutual respect rather than one person's expectations imposed on the other. The proposal came on a Saturday morning in my kitchen, where Tom had been helping Sarah grade papers while I made pancakes for breakfast. He simply pulled out his grandmother's engagement ring and said, "Sarah, I can't imagine building a life with anyone else. Will you marry me?" No elaborate setup, no expensive restaurant, no performance designed to impress anyone but the woman he loved. Just honest emotion and a promise to face the future together. Sarah said yes through happy tears, and I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Harold's inheritance complicated our lives. Pure, uncomplicated joy for my daughter's happiness. "We're thinking of a small ceremony," Sarah told me as she called friends and family to share the news. "Maybe the community center, or even here in your backyard if the weather's nice. Nothing fancy, just the people we love most. Whatever you want, sweetheart. It's your day." But even as I said the words, I felt the familiar weight of Harold's secret pressing against my chest. Sarah was planning a modest wedding because she thought we couldn't afford anything grander. Tom's family, his parents Robert and Helen and his sister Michelle, were salt-of-the-earth people who would appreciate a simple celebration, but I knew Sarah was still carrying shame about our financial limitations. The wedding planning process became an exercise in creative budgeting and careful compromises. Sarah found a beautiful dress at a consignment shop, spent hours making centerpieces from grocery store flowers, and researched affordable catering options that would feed 60 people without breaking what she assumed was our tight budget. Meanwhile, I had $7 million sitting in a bank account under my maiden name, earning interest that I never touched. Every day brought new reminders of the gulf between what Sarah thought we could afford and what I could actually provide. She apologized for asking me to pay for the photographer. "I know it's expensive, Mom, but we really want professional pictures. Worried about the cost of the reception dinner. Maybe we should just do cake and punch." And stressed about small details that money could have easily solved. "Tom's parents want to contribute to the wedding costs," she told me one evening. "But I don't want them to feel obligated. They're not wealthy either, and they've already done so much for us." Robert and Helen Bradley were retired teachers living on modest pensions, the kind of people who counted every dollar, but would give you their last 20 if you needed it. They'd offered to pay for the flowers and the church rental fee, stretching their budget because they wanted their son's wedding to be special. I could have paid for everything: the venue, the catering, the music, the flowers, a honeymoon to Europe, and a house down payment, without making a dent in Harold's inheritance. Instead, I watched good people sacrifice their financial security to give Sarah and Tom a celebration that was still smaller and simpler than what any bride deserved. The guilt was eating me alive. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sarah had what she called her crisis of confidence moment. We were addressing invitations in my kitchen when she suddenly put down her pen and started crying. "Mom, what if this is a mistake? What if Tom realizes he could have done better?" "Sweetheart, what are you talking about? Look at what I'm bringing to this marriage. Student loan debt, a teacher's salary, a family with no money to contribute to our future. Tom could have found someone with more to offer. You're offering him your heart and your partnership. That's everything. But practically speaking, I'm not exactly a prize. I can't even afford a proper wedding dress. I'm wearing a consignment shop find and serving grocery store chicken to our guests." The pain in her voice was unbearable. Sarah was measuring her worth by financial standards that had been imposed on her by Marcus, Patricia, and a society that confused wealth with value. She couldn't see what Tom saw: a brilliant, compassionate woman who would be an equal partner in building a life together. "Tom doesn't care about money," I said. "I know he doesn't. That's what makes this worse. He's marrying me despite my limitations, not because of my advantages. Sometimes I wonder if he'd be happier with someone who could contribute more to our financial security. Someone who could contribute more." My daughter was planning to marry a wonderful man who adored her, and she was worried about being a financial burden because she didn't know her mother was a multimillionaire. That night, I sat in my bedroom with 2 different wedding speeches in my hands. The first was the one I'd been planning to give: a simple toast about love, partnership, and the joy of watching Sarah find happiness with a man who cherished her for exactly who she was. The second was the speech I'd written in a moment of weakness, the one that would announce Harold's inheritance and promise to pay for Sarah and Tom's honeymoon, their house down payment, and anything else they needed to start their marriage without financial stress. I imagined the look on Sarah's face if I revealed the truth during my mother of the bride speech. The shock, the questions, the realization that she'd been worrying about money while her mother sat on millions. The relief would be enormous, but so would the confusion and potential resentment. More importantly, I imagined how the revelation would change Tom's relationship with our family. Right now, he loved Sarah without any expectation of financial benefit. He was planning to support her on his teacher's salary, to build their life together through careful budgeting and shared sacrifice. Learning about the inheritance might change that dynamic in ways none of us could predict. The wedding morning dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of perfect September weather that made you believe in fairy tales. Sarah had decided to get ready at my house, surrounded by her bridesmaids Jessica and Amy, along with Tom's sister Michelle and her childhood friend Claire. I'd secretly hired the best seamstress in the city to restore my mother's wedding dress for Sarah. The gown had been packed away for 40 years, yellowed with age and damaged by time, but Elena Vasquez had worked magic on the delicate lace and silk. Sarah had no idea I'd spent $3,000 on the restoration. She thought I'd simply found the dress in better condition than expected. "Mom, I can't believe how beautiful Grandma's dress looks," Sarah said as Elena helped her into the gown. "You must have taken such good care of it all these years. Your grandmother would be so happy to see you wearing it," I said, which was true even if it omitted certain expensive details about its restoration. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of hair styling, makeup application, and the kind of excited chatter that fills a room when women are preparing for a celebration. Sarah glowed with happiness, looking more beautiful than I'd ever seen her. Then Jessica made the comment that nearly broke my heart. "Sarah, this whole wedding is so romantic," she said while the photographer captured getting ready shots. "Tom is like a knight in shining armor, marrying you despite your financial limitations. It's so rare to find a man who doesn't care about money these days." The room went quiet. Jessica meant it as a compliment, but the implication was brutal. That Tom was being charitable by marrying a woman who couldn't contribute financially to their partnership. Sarah laughed it off, but I saw the hurt flash across her face before she could hide it. "Tom and I are partners," she said lightly. "We're both teachers, so we're both equally broke." But after the photographer moved on to other shots, Sarah pulled me aside. "Mom," she whispered, "I just hope Tom never feels like he married down. I know his parents are worried about our financial situation, about whether we'll be able to buy a house or have children without struggling the way we did when I was growing up. The way we struggled. My daughter was carrying shame about our past financial difficulties, worried that her husband's family saw her as a burden rather than a blessing. She had no idea that I could write a check for any house they wanted, could establish trust funds for their future children, could ensure they never worried about money again. Honey, Tom's parents love you. They see how happy you make their son, and that's all that matters to them. I hope so. I just want to be a good wife to him, not someone he has to take care of financially." The ceremony itself was perfect in its simplicity. Tom waited at the altar of the small community church looking like a man who'd won the lottery, his face lighting up the moment Sarah appeared in the doorway. The vows they'd written themselves spoke of partnership, mutual support, and building a life together based on shared values rather than material wealth. "Sarah," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion, "you make me want to be the best version of myself. I promise to support your dreams, to share your burdens, and to build something beautiful with you, no matter what challenges we face." "Tom," Sarah replied, "you've shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued for who I am. I promise to stand beside you as an equal partner, to face whatever comes with courage and hope, and to love you not for what you can give me, but for who you are." Equal partners. That's what they were, and that's what they deserved to remain. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, decorated with the flowers Sarah and her bridesmaids had arranged themselves and filled with the kind of genuine joy that money can't buy. Tom's parents had insisted on providing the catering. A local restaurant owner who owed Robert Bradley a favor agreed to serve a simple but delicious dinner for cost. I watched the celebration from the head table, my 2 speeches folded in my purse like competing futures. The room was full of teachers, church members, neighbors, and friends, people who measured wealth in relationships rather than bank balances. Everyone was having a wonderful time, celebrating 2 people who clearly adored each other. Then came time for the mother of the bride's speech. I stood at the microphone, looking out at Sarah and Tom's glowing faces, at the family and friends who'd gathered to celebrate their love, at the modest but heartfelt celebration that represented everything good about their relationship. My hand moved toward my purse, toward the speech that would change everything. I could end Sarah's financial worries right now, could give her the security she'd never had growing up, could ensure that she and Tom started their marriage with every possible advantage. But then I saw the way Tom was looking at Sarah, like she was the most precious thing in the world. Not because she might inherit money someday, not because she could solve his financial problems, but because she was the woman he'd chosen to love for the rest of his life. Tom had fallen in love with a teacher from a modest background whose mother worked in a school cafeteria. He'd proposed to a woman he believed would need his financial support, had planned a future based on 2 teachers' salaries and careful budgeting. His love was pure because it had nothing to do with money. Sarah had accepted his proposal, knowing she was bringing student debt and modest expectations to their marriage. She'd chosen him over wealthier suitors, had built their relationship on emotional rather than financial security. Her love was equally pure. I gave the first speech, the one about love, partnership, and the joy of watching two people build a life together based on shared values. I toasted their future and wished them happiness without mentioning money, inheritance, or financial security. The relief I felt was overwhelming. I'd protected something precious, the purity of their love and the foundation of their marriage. 6 months later, Sarah called me laughing about a conversation she'd had with Tom over breakfast. "Mom, you should hear the silly game Tom and I play. We pretend we've won the lottery and debate what we'd buy first. Tom wants a new car and a workshop for woodworking projects. I want to pay off our student loans and take a vacation to Italy. That sounds fun. The funny thing is, we never talk about buying anything really extravagant. Even in our fantasies, we're pretty practical. Tom says that's how he knows we're compatible. Our lottery dreams are actually achievable if we save long enough." They were happy, truly, genuinely happy, building their life together one careful decision at a time. They'd started a joint savings account for their someday house, planned weekend trips they could afford on teachers' salaries, and talked about children with the kind of practical optimism that comes from knowing you'll make it work whatever the challenge is. "We're thinking about looking at houses next year," Sarah continued. "Nothing fancy, but something with a yard and enough space for kids eventually. Tom's been taking on extra tutoring work, and I'm teaching summer school. We think we can save enough for a down payment by next fall." They were working extra jobs to save for a house down payment that I could have provided with a single phone call. They were planning their family's future around teacher salaries and careful budgeting while I had millions sitting untouched in a bank account. But they were doing it together as equal partners, without any outside interference or unbalanced power dynamics. Their marriage was built on love, respect, and shared sacrifice rather than financial rescue or inherited wealth. A year after the wedding, Tom got a promotion to assistant principal, and Sarah was selected to lead her school's literacy program. They bought a small house with a big backyard, adopting a rescue dog they named Shakespeare and starting a garden where they grew vegetables and herbs. "Mom, come see what we've done with the place," Sarah said during one of my visits. Tom built raised beds for the garden, and I've been learning to can our own tomatoes. We're becoming quite the domestic team. The house was modest but warm, filled with books and plants, and the kind of comfortable furniture that invited you to stay a while. Tom had refinished hardwood floors himself, and Sarah had painted every room with colors that reflected their personalities. It was exactly the kind of home they'd dreamed of building together. "We're thinking about starting a family soon," Sarah told me as we sat on their back porch watching Tom teach Shakespeare to fetch. "The timing feels right, and we've saved enough to handle the expenses of having a baby. Are you excited?" Terrified and thrilled in equal measure. "But Tom will be such a wonderful father, and I think we've built a solid foundation for raising children. We might not be able to give them everything, but they'll have love and stability and parents who work together as a team. Everything." She was still thinking in terms of limitations, still worried about what they couldn't provide rather than celebrating what they could offer. But she was also glowing with the confidence that comes from building something real with someone you trust completely. 2 years after the wedding, Sarah called me with news that made my heart sing. "Mom, I'm pregnant. Tom and I are over the moon. The baby's due in October, and we're already arguing about names and nursery themes." "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful news. I know it's going to be tight financially, but we've been saving, and Tom's gotten another small raise. We'll make it work. We always do." They would make it work, just like they'd made everything else work, through love, partnership, and shared determination. They didn't need Harold's inheritance to build a beautiful life together. 5 years after Sarah's wedding, she and Tom had 2 children, Emma Rose and baby William Thomas, and had settled into the kind of family rhythm that spoke of deep contentment. Tom had become principal of his school, Sarah had completed her master's degree while raising babies, and they'd created the kind of home where laughter was common and love was taken for granted. "Mom, do you ever regret not having more money when I was growing up?" Sarah asked during one of our Sunday dinners. The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" "I was watching Emma play with her toys today, most of them hand-me-downs or thrift store finds, and I realized she's having just as much fun as kids with expensive gadgets. It made me think about my own childhood, about how you made everything special even when we didn't have much. Do you feel like you missed out on anything important? Not the important things. You taught me that love and security don't come from money, that the best things in life are relationships and experiences, and the satisfaction of working hard for what you achieve. Tom and I are passing those same values on to our children. Sarah had learned the lessons I'd hoped to teach her. That worth isn't measured in dollars, that happiness comes from love and purpose rather than financial security, and that the best partnerships are built on equality and mutual respect. The $7 million remained my secret, but it had served its purpose in the most unexpected way. Knowing I had that financial safety net had given me the strength to let Sarah and Tom build their life without interference, to trust that their love was strong enough to weather whatever challenges they faced. Some secrets aren't meant to burden. They're meant to preserve the precious things that money can't buy. Sarah's marriage was built on a foundation of pure love, unmarked by financial considerations or unequal power dynamics. Tom had chosen her when he thought she came from modest means, and she'd chosen him knowing they'd build their future on teachers' salaries. That foundation was worth protecting, even if it meant watching them work extra jobs and save for years to achieve goals I could have provided instantly. My daughter got married, and to this day, she still doesn't know about Harold's $7 million. And you know what? I thank God every day for keeping that secret because their happiness, built on love, partnership, and shared dreams, is worth more than all the money in the world. The inheritance will be there when they truly need it, when the children are ready for college, or when some genuine emergency requires financial intervention. But for now, it remains my secret, protecting the beautiful life Sarah and Tom have built together from the complications that sudden wealth might bring. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to earn their happiness through their own efforts, to build something precious with their own hands, and to know that their success belongs entirely to them. Harold's money bought me the luxury of silence, and that silence protected the most valuable thing I possess, my daughter's pure, uncomplicated happiness. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe and like this video to continue listening to this type of story daily, and also to appreciate this community too. I would like to know the country in which you are listening to this story. Which country is that? Please comment below.